on this episode of Rebel Spirit Radio.
I guess this is an important point for people who are freaked out right now. Instead of getting really freaked out that the world is crumbling, that things are collapsing, institutions are collapsing, and it's not quite clear what they're going to be replaced with, especially from a neurobiological point of view, from the standpoint of collapsing into fight or flight reactivity, which can curtail our broadest vision. Part of the suggestion from Campbell, part of the suggestion from Jung, part of the suggestion from a wide array of esoteric traditions is not to collapse into more fear, but to actually embrace the collapse as an initiation.
Hmm.
And what that does is if you can say, I accept and I'm willing to consciously choose to go into the dark night, to consciously choose to go into the unknown, to consciously choose to go into the metaphoric cave, or to consciously pass the threshold of my comfort zone and embark on adventure into the unknown. If it can be a conscious choice, that changes the entire trajectory of the path.
Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I am joined by author Neale to discuss his book, Return with Elixir, which delves into themes from Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, Jungian psychology, and Tibetan Buddhism. Neale outlines the crises of modern society, including the current socio-political polarization, the significance of virtue and wisdom, and the hopeful potential for its personal and collective spiritual transformation. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. Your support is truly appreciated. Neale is a psychotherapist, teacher of Tibetan Buddhism, and founder of the Gradual Path, where he leads pilgrimage of spiritual transformation around the world. He trained intensively with Buddhist scholars Robert Thurman and Joseph Loyoza, as well as Tibetan master Geshe Tenzin Zopa. And he has taught meditation and integrative healing at Harvard, Columbia, and Cornell University hospitals. He is the author of Gradual Awakening and co-editor of Advances in Contemplative Psychotherapy. He joins me today to discuss his latest book, Return with Elixir. Miles, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Well, thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, as am I. I told you that I just finished reading your book this morning, and and we also talked about this. I read a lot of books for the podcast, and some I like better than others. And what I told someone after reading your book is I felt like it was poking at my spirit and kind of prompting things. So I hope you take that as a compliment because it's meant to be a compliment. But
It's
it addresses
wonderful to hear. Great.
yeah. It addresses a lot of things that I've thought about personally and that has been a topic on the podcast in many ways. And there's so much that's covered in the book. I was kind of struggling on, where do we start? Because you incorporate Joseph Campbell in the hero's journey and Carl Jung, and not just Jungian psychology, but Jung's kind of his biography and his own confrontation with the unconscious, as it's shown in the Red Book. Tibetan Buddhism, of course, the Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, alchemy, initiation, a little bit of astrology and Bali location. So you bring a lot of things together and weave them together just quite beautifully, I want to say. So I was thinking that maybe the place to begin, this is where I thought, was in the book you note with Buddhism, and there's this approach to Buddhism that's kind of a medical approach, which is the identifying the symptoms and the diagnosis, the prognosis, and then the treatment. And it seemed to me that that's kind of in some ways what you're doing in the book, and that the book itself is the treatment. So I thought that maybe we could begin with the symptoms. You know, what's going on in the world that caused you to want to write this book?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. The Buddha's medical model, is very succinct. It's a great way to structure, organize, and sort through information. So that's a very astute entry point for us. I guess, you yourself personally, as we chatted about before we got on the call, and your listeners are undoubtedly, amidst a constellation of crises, which some have termed the polycrises. And so, depending on where we situate ourselves, we could be looking at one or more convergence of these. Any one of them would be enough to occupy the concentration, the attention of an entire generation, but we're being hit simultaneously by a number of them. Of course, there's the ecological crisis, where we are at and of course, all of these are very contentious topics also to be clear about that. The economic crisis is also just beginning to be felt across Europe and the United States. The so-called developed nations are, in a way, I see them as sort of decks of cards or houses of cards that are teetering on the edge here. We have a mental health crisis, of course, where we were in full blown witness to it during the pandemic, where there's just an absolute deluge of mental health, chronic mental health conditions, depression, not least of which just impacting so many people. But underlying that depression, I think, is just the apathy and the sense of hopelessness and sort of not knowing who we are, where we're going, what's going to happen tomorrow has just sort of destabilized us. We have, sort of a crisis of confidence in leadership across the planet. And we also have been witness to overreach, a certain authoritarian crackdown and overreach in cahoots with media that I think was also evident during the pandemic that should leave all of us absolutely startled. But I also want to say that the deep polarization that we're experiencing, at least in the United States, is a kind of distraction from where true power and the orchestration of these kinds of events are really happening. So we can get pitted against each other and really fail to really consider what's really going on. Anyway, so these are just a number of the crises that I mentioned in the top of the book. I think what it feels like, not to get so heady, but what it feels like is a sense of destabilization. What's going to happen to me? Where is my income coming from? Who do I believe? Who do I trust? What's going to happen tomorrow? I mean, I think these basic questions are impacting everybody at whatever strata of socioeconomic status and wherever culture they may be coming from. It feels very much, if I can use a metaphor, of the carpet has been pulled out and there isn't really stable ground to stand on. And I think that cuts across all these crises. There's a sense of, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I have the internal resources to manage the chaos, and I don't know what to expect. And so I think that may be a good starting point for the symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing that you have a phrase that you use, and apparently it comes from the your book Gradual Awakening. And I don't know if this is a symptom or part of the diagnosis, but it's this idea of a sickness of paradigm.
Yeah, that
And
gets into that is a description of the fundamental causes. So,
okay.
if we're going to just structure the conversation, their symptom is followed by the etiology. So, when you go to the doctor, you're saying my leg hurts or I've got, palpitations. Then the doctor, gets a full history and then looks deeper into what might be the underlying causes. Once the underlying causes lead to a certain diagnostic, then you can ask yourself the question, is this terminal? Is there anything we can do about it? Is there a potential resolution to it? And then if there is, then finally you can prescribe a treatment protocol. So what we're talking about is once you look around the world You look around your neighborhood, you look in your own life, and you start to identify the places where you feel symptomatic. The next question is what's really going on? Can you go deeper? Can you go deeper into the fundamental causes? And is there, as I tried to do over the last 5 years writing this book, is there a fundamental cause that actually ties all these discrete, seemingly discrete crises together?
Mm.
And that can appear reductionistic, but in another way, I follow the Buddha's very, very deep penetration into the fundamental causes of human suffering. And there, the Buddha identified something called human blindness, or sometimes called delusion, sometimes called misapprehension, sometimes called misperception. In other words, the Buddha traced the manifold symptoms of that he would call suffering into a fundamental delusion or misunderstanding about who and what our real nature is. So it's our suffering is born out of not seeing reality clearly.
Yeah.
Well, part of the poly crisis is, at least at one level, born out of a misalignment, a cultural or paradigm misalignment or misunderstanding. And we are now at sort of a tail end of feeling the blowback or the repercussions or the residual consequences of our paradigm, our worldview. And I think when I have conversations with people, and you as a professor of religious studies and philosophy, I'm sure appreciate just how important and central our worldview is. But to the to the average person, it's like the water that we swim in. It's so close that we don't even challenge our basic assumptions about reality. We externalize them, and then we start to look for solutions out in reality. We rarely turn our awareness around and ask ourselves, am I co-creating? Is the way that I see the world part of the problem?
Mm.
And so if we just look at very simply the rise of materialism and the rise of the paradigm of scientific reductionism, we're going to look somewhere on the order of 400 years ago, the outgrowth and sort of retort or sort of challenge to the largely 2,000-year religious tradition of Christianity. And so we're starting to see kind of the pushback, if you will, a kind of vacillation or an exchange or kind of pendulum swing between a largely predominant monotheistic tradition that started to have its own shadow, its own
Mm.
backlash, the Crusades, the burning at the stake, the sort of imposition, the Inquisition, the sort of religious sort of authoritarianism, the sort of the non-rational, co-opting of religious authority and belief. You start to see the rise of rational, logical, humanistic centered sensibility, which was incredibly important at the time of the Age of Reason in Western Europe, what's called the Western Enlightenment, which then bears out a kind of incredible move forward in terms of what its capabilities are in terms of medicine, technology, scientific revolution, sending a person to the moon, eventually cracking the genetic code. I mean, there's so much promise that we were the recipients of as a result of this evolutionary step. But now we're also experiencing, just like religion was experiencing some 400 years ago, the backlash or the shadow. We are now experiencing what I would call the consequence or the shadow side of the age of reason, which is that we have become too adherent and too reliant and too dependent on a very narrow bandwidth of perception that kind of reduces everything to the world of matter, and in doing so has jettisoned or has unknowingly rejected the spirit. And this is how we can dominate the modern world. We can dominate the material world. But we've also fail to recognize our connection, our relationality, and the impact our consequences have. And so you have this belief that our being is nothing more than a set of chemistry and brain impulses that drives us in a one lifetime perspective in which there's no consequence to our action, and so we should eat, drink, and dominate the world and be merry, for tomorrow we die, because that's all we are. And so that kind of underpinning, that kind of worldview, is being exported throughout the entire world. It's no longer just a Western thing. It's no longer just a Western phenomenon. It is kind of secular, modern, materialistic, reductionistic paradigm now pervades the entire globe. And what it's done is it leads to exploitation. It leads to a kind of belief that you can pillage the world and not worry about the consequences. And we shouldn't worry about each other. We shouldn't worry about ourselves. We don't even know who we are. The
Mm,
old perennial axial age questions of who are we and where are we going no longer matter. It's just a matter of how much can we gobble up in the time that we're here. And that's a little reductionistic, of course, but I think it captures the underbelly of the existential polycrisis that we're experiencing. Why it is that we don't care about the planet. Why it is that, the economic system has just exploded into a kind of greed-based, exploitation. Why it is that, the mental health crisis of not understanding who we are has led to us feeling apathetic or existentially doubtful about our very natures, on and on and on. So I called that large swath of issues a sickness of paradigm.
mm.
It's like the symptoms that we're experiencing have a direct relationship to our worldview. And so any attempt to kind of resolve it actually needs to address the worldview.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that I've thought about myself. I know, and I should know who said this. Maybe it was Goya. I think it was an artist, but the sleep of reason produces monsters. And I've often thought that,
Wow.
that the sleep of the imaginal, the sleep of the spiritual also produces monsters. That if we focus so much on rationality, but ignore the irrational, that's every bit as dangerous.
I think you're onto something Jung would very much agree with, which is it doesn't matter which step in which direction you take, there's always a shadow.
Yeah.
So there was a shadow to religion,
Hmm.
and the rise of empiricism and the rise of humanism and the rise of logic and reason was an attempt to address the blindness of the religious worldview. Now science has become the new religion. Some people even call it scientism.
Yeah.
And people in the white coats occupy the high priest position. And we outsource, the population outsources you because they become so specialized, just like in Vedic Brahmanical traditions, where it was only the priest that could do the sacrificial fire, and you basically had to
Yeah.
pay them to do it. I mean, is there really any difference? Like we have, you know, scientists and doctors occupy that high priest role where, if you don't know how to heal yourself and something's wrong with you, you've got to pay a lot of money to go for their particular kind of intervention. And basically there we sort of feel that they're so specialized. How could I ever know what they know? They're seeing something I'll never be able to see. But yet there's a complete breakdown in the scientific worldview, and it has its own shadow. I mean, any of your listeners who have had a medical illness and have gone through the Western medical industrial complex know it is devoid of empathy. You are being treated basically as cattle on an assembly line, or a car on assembly line. You go into your doctor's office, they don't really greet you. They don't really see you as a whole person. They see you as a problem. They see you as a broken cog in a misaligned system. They try to repair something over here, but they fail to recognize its consequence somewhere else in the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
And all the while, you don't feel the humanity. I mean, that's what's being lost, right? And so you can get specialized, incredibly specialized intervention without humanity or dignity. And I think, okay, well, anyone who's been through that feels that something is totally missing. And so
Yeah.
that part of the equation now needs to be addressed. And where are we heading? We're heading to a place where we need much more integration between these two
Mhm.
worlds. But maybe we'll save that for later in the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I had integration down as one of the topics because I think that's important. But yeah, I think that'll come towards the end. One of the things that kind of to talk about the hero's journey, I wanted to kind of add to what you wrote, and I don't know if you are familiar with this term, but very early in the book, you look at I guess it's Greek, nostos. You said that in Homer, this refers to the love for and longing to return home. And that's often a theme in the hero's journey is the desire to go home. Certainly with Odysseus and, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. But the term that I like, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, is solastasia,
Oh,
which
tell me.
is,
No, I've never heard of it.
yeah, solastasia is homesickness while you're still at home. It's that your home is undergoing so many changes
Hmm.
in a variety of ways that it no longer is home. I mean, you're there, but it's not the place that it used to be. And this is
Say the
often
word again. Solastasia.
solastasia. Yeah, and
It's
it's often
incredible. That's a
yeah, it's
great
often
find.
yeah, it's often used in reference to like our environmental crises that there's so many people that have this longing to have the home that we used to have that's not being totally destroyed and before our eyes. So I just wanted to ask you about that because I thought it was
I love it. I
uh,
think it's a perfect word. I think it very much describes, two things. One, the dis-ease
yeah.
in where we are. And
Yeah.
that can be the dis-ease where we are as a culture. It can be right down to your own like sense of disharmony or anxiety or restlessness or wanderlust or homesickness. You're calling it homesickness. Okay, so it means that where we are right now should feel like home, but doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
one, a recognition that there is impulses from the deeper psyche that something is off. It's like a little, in the dashboard of your car when you're running out of fuel, it's like it gives you a little warning sign, a little signal, something you need something here, something's missing. I guess in the Matrix trilogy, it would be Morpheus saying there's a thorn in the mind.
Mm.
Okay, there's something not right. It should feel different. It should feel like more fulfilling. It should feel more comfortable. It should feel more safe. It should feel more inspiring. It should feel more connected. Something is off. So again, we're using this diagnostic kind of
Mm.
perspective. But then I think there's something really important about the thing that's off, which is how do you respond to it? So if
Yeah.
home right now doesn't feel like home, what do you try to do? Do you try to rearrange the furniture? Do you try to paint the walls? What do you do? Do you try to buy a different bed? Do you put more pictures up? You may start a process of trying to tinker with your environment somewhat. And maybe you fail to consider that maybe there's something off in you.
Right.
And that's not a disparaging comment. What it is actually, from the Campbellian point of view, is an invitation for an adventure. It means, okay, if things are off, it's not about changing the environment so much as changing you.
Hmm.
Something inside of you is probably ready for a change, is probably ready. What Jung would add to the conversation is you're probably ready for growth, expansion.
Yeah.
Now, this can mean leaving home physically. It would then embark, it would Campbell called it the call to adventure. It then prompts the beginning of a journey. So maybe you do leave home. Maybe you travel to another state. Maybe you go on an adventure. You go into the wilderness. Maybe you go abroad. But from the Jungian point of view, it may also mean that you leave all your comforts and the reinforcement contingencies that have created a sense of identity that has become a prison. It has calcified. Things have become too rigid. The way that you see yourself, your belief systems, your value systems, the more intangible aspects of you have become confining in such a way that some level of vitality is not coming through any longer.
Mm.
And so that marks, and also in a kind of invitation, are you willing to go into the unknown? Are you willing to go into the depths of your psyche? Are you willing to meet this message, which Jung believed was an impulse from the soul
Mm.
that's suggesting to you it's time to grow? And in order to grow, you have to let go. You have to become unsafe. You have to descend. You have to enter the unknown. You have to become uncomfortable. You may have to meet things that could actually hurt you. You may have to risk actually, undermining yourself. And so this is at this juncture in the trajectory of any kind of journey, we start to look at the symptoms as invitations, including the polycrisis. Instead of getting really freaked out, I guess this is an important point for people who are freaked out right now. Instead of getting really freaked out that the world is crumbling, that things are collapsing, institutions are collapsing, and it's not quite clear what they're going to be replaced with, especially from a neurobiological point of view, from the standpoint of collapsing into fight or flight reactivity, which can curtail our broadest vision. Part of the suggestion from Campbell, part of the suggestion from Jung, part of the suggestion from a wide array of esoteric traditions is not to collapse into more fear, but to actually embrace the collapse as an initiation.
Mm.
And what that does is if you can say, I accept and I'm willing to consciously choose to go into the dark night, to consciously choose to go into the unknown, to consciously choose to go into the metaphoric cave, or to consciously pass the threshold of my comfort zone and embark on adventure into the unknown. If it can be a conscious choice, that changes the entire trajectory of the path.
Mm.
Because if we fall back on evolutionary fight flight instincts that want to buckle down and want to tighten and want to control and want to know and want to have certainty, we are going to be steamrolled by the poly crisis. It's a tsunami on the horizon that there's no way you're going to face with that level of biological reactivity. You won't have the presence of mind, the creativity, or the inner resource to actually navigate it. It's not the right tool for the job. Actually, fight or flight is really just a temporary fix. It's not the ultimate fix.
Right. Yeah, and right now we don't really have too many places to run to anyway. We can't really do the flight, but it is a theme that comes up on the podcast, and actually one of the very earliest podcasts I did, that we are undergoing an initiation or are about to undergo a collective initiation. And one of the ways that I often look at this, and you address it in the book as well, and I think this is pertinent to this idea of an initiation, is the hermetic idea of as above, so below, but also as within, so without. And that if you begin looking at these polycrises and see them as representing something of the human soul. And you wrote in the book that we're very fragmented. The world's fragmented and we're polarized. And, we've put ourselves into these camps of opposites and so on and so forth. And part of initiations, especially with shamanic initiations, is this idea of, yes, there's a death, but also there's often this sort of symbolic dismemberment. And it seems like we have been dismembered in many ways. We're dismembered from ourselves, we're dismembered from each other. And what a lot of my guests will say is, well, we need to remember who we are. And they use that in the sense of, like we've forgotten and we have to remember. But I always think of it in terms of initiation, that we have to remember ourselves. We have to bring ourselves back together.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. I mean, Nick, I'm going to pause here because I want to take a step back and ask you
Mm,
something because it's
sure.
relevant here since you have so many of these incredible conversations. Since the pandemic, have you noticed a particular pattern, theme, or constellation of insights that are more prominent since doing your
Mm,
podcast? Something that has emerged from the collective unconscious that unifies people that come from discrete backgrounds and
mm,
disciplines. I know you talk to astrologers, artists,
yeah.
philosophers, psychologists, spiritual people. Is there something post-pandemic that you're seeing in your conversations? Is there something emerging from the collective unconscious through each of these sets of eyes and disciplines that you can point your finger at? Do you feel there
Yeah.
is a meta consensus somehow
Mm.
emerging?
Somewhat. I think that the main thing that I would point to is what I just said, is that people keep saying that, well, we need to remember who we are. And there seems to be also, I've noticed since the pandemic, and maybe this began beforehand, but this desire for creating a relationship with ancestors. I've had a number of guests who talk about ancestral relationships, and shamanism is something that kind of keeps coming up over and over and over again. And I look at that kind of in a not just post pandemic, but probably part of this larger narrative of the past, 400 years, and Christianity, especially in the West, doesn't seem to be fulfilling that spiritual need. And it seems like people, I think that people have been searching for that for a long time, but it seems to me that that search has gotten, there's more of an urgency to that search now, of finding something that nourishes the soul and the spirit, and trying to figure out what that might be. I know that, one of this is a little bit off in your book. You noted at some point, I'm trying to find it on here, I think that maybe Jung addressed it, and you, I think, if I remember right, said the Dalai Lama, yes, here it is, that they wondered whether it's not better to stay within our cultural matrix,
Mm,
reigniting the embers of our tradition, spiritual legacies.
mm,
And, but, it's interesting because I don't see too many people reaching out towards Christianity for that. Instead, what they're trying to do, it seems to me, is go what preceded that. And, and I think that gets them, to some more, I mean, obviously, kind of like pagan ideas, but the shamanic is where they're going.
yeah. Yeah.
And so this transformation of consciousness, and this feeling that somehow we have to collectively transform consciousness, I would say would be one of the other primary themes that seems to be coming up. And it seems like there's been an uptick in that since the pandemic as well.
Yeah. Awesome. That makes perfect sense. I think it's right in line with what we're talking about. I mean, if the way I hear what you're saying is, I also talk about the cosmology of things and the fact that we are at the tail end of the Piscean age, which is a period of 2,150 years that occupies one increment, like on a clock, of the larger cosmic cycle called the Great Year, or what the Vedic tradition calls the Yuga cycle. This is a large 25,000 year period. And so just like a clock, its internal shift from 12 to 1 and 1 to 2 occupies about 2,150 years, and has a particular archetypal signature. And we are now finding ourselves at the tail end of one of these, what Jung called a Plutonic month, which is the shift from the Piscean to the Aquarian age. We're right on the cusp here, and we're in the sort of sea change bardo liminal space between two great eons. And the idea that Christianity actually marked the inception or the onset of the Piscean Age. And if you read people's books like the incredible Brian Marescu,
Mhm.
Immortality Key, who suggested that, the period of the rising of Christ, you see the end of the pagan era and the beginning of Christianity. There was another kind of period of sea change here where there was intermingling of ideas. There was much more fluidity
Yeah.
and there was much more interchange and there was probably much more cross-cultural pollination of ideas. And so Christ was probably seen more mystical and probably, and this is why Marescu's book, Immortality Key, is really important because there was psychedelic sacraments and there was expansion of consciousness and there was, the kind of sensibility that the ordinary person could have a direct gnosis themselves. And then slowly things become institutionalized and power and greed and corruption start to dominate the religious authority, and you get a kind of reification and calcification of the tradition, and suddenly the vitality and the possibility for the ordinary person to get an internal experience of the divine diminishes, and it just becomes again just kind of a corrupt outsource institution that is situated in such a way that people at the pinnacle or the top, the high priests, get to have all the fun, and and everybody else is just a bozo on the bus. And that then, it then goes into a dark age. It goes into a period of collapse because anything that is rigid becomes brittle, and anything that's brittle becomes fragmented. And that's where we are. And so I think what you're pointing to is in the depths of the human spirit. People, not only do they rightfully have suspicion against religious authority, but their soul, something deep within them, is yearning for the reconnection or the remembering, the coming together again of a sense of vitality and the sense of transcendent experience. And so you have these kind of dead, hollow edifices of religious dogma that have ritual that have no meaning anymore. And so people are looking. Now, on the other side of this equation, I mean, you mentioned shamanism, and you also mentioned my quoting of the Dalai Lama and Jung at this juncture is like, okay, if you're looking for something, it may be good to go to the to your own traditions. And I would just put in brackets there the mystical versions of your
Yeah.
own traditions. And
Yeah.
that's really key. I think you're absolutely right. People want a personal experience of the divine. They
Yeah.
don't want an intermediary. They don't want to be told what to do. Top down isn't good enough. Ideas don't serve. They want an actual. So what's happening right now is you have the psychedelic revolution. Okay, so anybody can have a ceremony, and if done well with the right setting, intention, preparation, and integration, can have a direct experience of something. Shamanism. Many more people are going into shamanic situations. Now, they may be foreign to their heritage and their culture, but they're trying to access a direct experience that takes them into the underworld and takes them right through the apotheosis, the sense of communion with something transcendent. Many other people are trying different kinds of things. I mean, we have a phenomenon called Burning Man, and like I would
Mm.
classify that more as New Age. Now, I have a lot of criticism of the New Age, but one thing I can say is that it is completely appropriate urge, a response to a deeper urge. If you look out
Mm.
at what's happening in the deserts and you just look at it from an objective point of view, you have all the intangibles that have been missing. You have people who are communing in tribal kind of things. You have music, you have dance, you have the Dionysian ecstasy, you have the kind of, you know, throw off the yoke or the tether of rules and authoritarian crackdown and limiting structures. You have the edifices of ritual. You have a kind of, the construction of pagan kind of spirit. You have temples that are being constructed. You have effigies that are being constructed. You have all these sort of very deep archetypal symbolic structures or psychic structures that reflect something deep in this in the unconscious. There's something that is deeply imprinted and encoded in the human experience. What the shadow of all that does is that there's also a lot of incoherence.
Mm.
There's also kind of superficial kind of belief system, because they have jettisoned religion, and they're just forming what feels good in the moment, to be free and to be sexual and to be vibrant and to dance and to slip into oneness and to use symbols creatively. That part is all very understandable, but there isn't a coherent cosmology, and there isn't a coherent set of practices. It's sort of a free for all. It's sort of a smorgasbord. This is the problem with New Age, is that it won't last very long because it won't go very deep. And if it
Mm.
doesn't go very deep, it won't provide satisfaction, or it won't meet or address the deeper yearning. It will kind of just stay at the surface and kind of feel good. And one of the things that emerges, a lot of narcissism around
Mm.
this. The
Yeah.
shadow of it is that, you get people who do one or two doses of very powerful psychotropic substances, and they feel the ecstasy of the moment, and they feel that they've had a breakthrough into the divine, and they have somehow had a very powerful, potent, deep experience, which I won't contend with. They have. The problem is that the lack of preparation means that very deep, potent experience hasn't uprooted the underlying insecurities and narcissism. So, on the return end of those things, there can just be a very large amount of self-inflation
Yeah.
and grandiosity. And so you have a very confused set of people that want to now be new age shamans and want to do these
Yeah.
kind of treatments for people, and want to,
Yeah.
now they're in a position, in the indigenous traditions, you were born into these things, you were raised through and through to that totem was passed from father to son, or from mother to daughter, or whatever it might be. It was like a lifelong commitment, and that lifelong commitment actually had a lot of rules and boundaries and etiquette that safeguarded it.
Yeah.
That now, we don't want those things. We want to have the pure divine on our terms, sort of thing. And
Mm.
once we feel it, we feel grossly empowered by it. And there are no more structures of check and balances. And so you have a lot of people that now are putting themselves, self-proclaimed shamans, in a position where they they want to do this
Mm.
work with others at the tune of $300 an hour.
Yeah.
So, this is a
Yeah.
sort of I haven't been in my career afraid to talk about the shadow, because I think it's important. Now, it casts a wide disparaging remark on the entire movement, and I don't want to do that. I want to say that it comes from a very understandable impulse,
Yeah.
that ordinary traditional forms of dogmatic religion aren't satisfying, and people are looking, and they're going to find power tools that can help them taste and realign with the sacred inside of them. That much I respect. Then we're in this kind of gray area. It's like, how do you proceed?
Yeah.
And I think we have to think very cautiously and with deep consideration about that, because I think some of the power tools, whether they come from Tantra, or they come from psychedelics, or they come from shamanism, or they come from Hermeticism, or they're a reversion back to the mystical traditions, these things required initiation and long forms of commitment to
Mm.
very intensive and comprehensive systems of practice. And so we have to ask ourselves, those that really want this apotheosis, those that really want this inner transformation, those that really want to taste the divine, are you willing to really embrace a full, coherent tradition that has cosmology, coherent philosophy, coherent psychology, coherent set of practices and rituals? So I think there, if you start to ask that question to people, that's where they will hesitate and vacillate,
Mm.
because they've been traumatized in a way. They don't want the ritual. They don't want a commitment to the guru. They don't want a commitment to a tradition, because they view those things, the association is, those things hurt me. Those things
Yeah.
hurt us. So, but we have to talk about it. We have to go through that very challenging conversation.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. And I don't know where the New Age stands right now. I did research on my master's thesis was in part about the New Age movement. And it's still somewhat popular, but I don't know so many people that identify as New Age.
But it's
But
there. I mean,
oh
you
yeah,
have to see it. I
yeah.
mean, like I would put the contemporary versions of New Age versus those that appeared in the 60s and 70s, like the laws of attraction.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
Ma
that
the
manifestation. Yeah, yeah.
manifestation bullshit is absolutely off the chain.
Mm,
It is so far in the zeitgeist,
right.
and it is a $1 billion industry.
Hmm.
It's making so much traction. It's got people absolutely compelled. I find it really predatorial.
Hmm.
I find it nonsense. I have no, I don't split any hairs about it. I find it really predatorial. This
Right.
idea that you could use your mind to absolutely gratify every narcissistic impulse and urge in your mind,
Yeah.
and you could somehow draw out of the ether or out of the empty void a better partner, a better
Mm,
paying job, a better this, a better that, so that you would actually feel more self-important than you did, as an inverse to your lack of self-importance and
mm,
your inner sense that you are lacking. It could, you could, if you could just buy this product or do this program or go on this
yeah.
retreat,
Right. Yeah.
you could draw in from the matrix everything that would make you feel special and important and
Yeah.
powerful. Is just crack. It is narcissism on steroids. There's no traditional, true, authentic lineage of mysticism that really talks about things this way.
Right.
If
Yeah.
it anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And what I was going to say is that what I see is a lot of what's been referred to as toxic positivity, which kind
Mm.
of gets into that whole manifestation stuff. It's like, well, you're just not being positive enough. And it's like, but, sometimes life sucks and that needs to be addressed. And there's also, I had conversation with Mitch Horowitz, and he proudly identifies as New Age. But I kind of pressed him on some of the philosophy, and he admitted that one of the things that the New Age does not have is any kind of theodicy because it blames suffering on the individual in a sense, and that just simply doesn't work.
Let
But
me, can I
yes,
say something about what you
yeah,
just said? There was something important there that I think is in my book. I try to
yeah,
repurpose, is the idea that life is hard and life is suffering, and we should just accept it. Yeah, I think probably sometimes people perceive Buddhism that way, that what the
yeah,
Buddha was saying is a reminder that life is really hard. And I think there is some merit to it, especially when the underbelly of developed nations is that you should aspire for ultimate comfort. I think there's something, that somehow we could Dave Asprey biohack our way into ultimate comforts and ultimate
yeah,
health and ultimate this and ultimate that and then there's the naysayers like you and me who maybe come in and say, no, no, life is hard. But I think it's more than just life is hard. I mean, what I really took away from my research on Jung is that the heart is the growth place and no other
mm,
place.
mm,
It's not just hard to accept that it's hard. It's hard that the way you work with the hard helps you grow. And I think that's revolutionary. If nothing
yeah,
else from the Elixir book, rebranding the hard as the growth opportunity and not just the shooting for the light.
mm,
It's not just getting the psychedelic helicopter to the vantage point of oneness at the top of the mountain. It's the struggle to get to the top of the mountain that builds the inner resources so that you can sustain the mountain
yeah,
view both at the top of the mountain and back down again when you get there.
Yeah.
In other words, the hard struggle that takes time, and you break your knee or you twist your ankle or you're climbing on your belly up the mountain to get that view that some people want to bypass and will inevitably find power tools to bypass. It's not just accepting that it's hard to get up the mountain and trying to convey that to the people that have a free pass with a ski lift and saying, life is hard. What you guys are doing with the ski lift isn't valid. It's saying that the hard graft of getting up there and the hard graft of getting back down are the necessary ingredients in helping you sustain the mountaintop view.
Mm.
That they change the human brain structure, they change your psyche, the internal intangibles of who you are to get up there, so that when you have oneness or you have transcendence or you have whatever, that there's some place for that seed of that view, that new view, especially when we're talking at the top of our conversation that the problem is view. Okay, so we're all agreeing that having a proper view is essential to living a better life, but how you get to that view and how you bring it back down matter. And it
Mm.
turns out that the difficulties that most of us would like to avoid, and in our marketplace, we have so many tools to now avoid them, to get around them, to bypass them, and to shoot over them, and to shoot straight to the moon and back, actually shortchanges us.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have problems wherever we go. I mean, if you just choose to bypass it, I'm a therapist, and so typically in the last few years since the Renaissance, the psychedelic Renaissance happens, I inevitably have people who come back from Peru or have taken psychedelics on their own or have gone to see a new age shaman or even a really legitimate experience. And they're having trouble with integration because they've had a
Right.
mountaintop view, and now they feel alone in the world, and the world doesn't have, there's a mismatch on their return because they don't know how to fit in. They don't know if they should return to their job. They feel disconnected with people who don't have this view, who haven't had this kind of experience, and so it's disjointed. And I'm left with the fallout of, no, this is why it's important, if you're going to do psychedelics, to do them with proper preparation and back-end integration built into that whole coherent cosmology. But now we have to fragment to outsource that to a like weird psychologist who lives in Bali, or you have to find this one, or you have to find that
Yeah.
one. We have to do that work piecemeal. So we're going to have the problems either which way.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So even if you
Yeah.
jump to the top, you're going to have it on the back end.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are some people that, and I think this is pretty common, in terms of the psychedelics and brews like ayahuasca, that they kind of approach this as a one and done thing. That, I'm going to take this medicine and that's going to fix me and everything's going to be hunky dory after that. But it's not. You still have to do the work. You
You have to
still
do the
have to
work.
do you have to do the work. You have to do the integration. And the same, with Buddhism, I always, when I teach it, the noble truth, dukkha. And I know that sometimes people like to translate that as, everything is suffering. And I'm like, well, no, what they're saying is, or what the Buddha was saying is, there is suffering. We all suffer, but that doesn't mean that we also can't have great joy and love and moments of ecstasy and intimacy, but it's all going to be touched by this. But, it's something that we work with and continue to try to better ourselves and better the world. And I think that's crucially important. And that's something that I think that is really at the core of your book in many ways is, it's the bodhisattva vow. You're not taking that vow just so that it's not just about you. You're doing this to alleviate the suffering of all beings.
Yeah. I mean, this is again, I'm not preaching Buddhism. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
convert anybody. I'm just coming from my own perspective. I've had a chance over the last few years to really expand her own horizons on my own journey. I've spent 25 years in Tibetan Buddhism and psychology and trying to fuse them together. Return with the Elixir represents my own journey of exposing myself to new disciplines, and with the hopes that I could see bridges and commonality and find myself talking to people of different kinds of backgrounds and having conversations so that we can situate ourselves in time and space in a way where we can really understand how we're going to move forward together. And this is not about Buddhism.
Right.
This is not about spreading Buddhism, but I do find there's some deep kernels in Buddhism, particularly this thing that you're raising called the Bodhisattva spirit or orientation or aspiration, which I think is very well articulated and it's very, very sorely needed, which is your shamanism, even your New Age movement, your biohacking, your optimal lifing, your, all these disciplines that are coming to the fore. And a lot of them are, trying to meet this, as we mentioned, this very human urge to have a reconnection with the divine. The point that the Bodhisattva orientation suggests is it's not enough if that's just for you.
Hmm.
If you feel whole, if you feel peaceful, if you have purpose, if you have an optimal body and and experiencing longevity, whatever it might be, it still ultimately won't be enough because in the end, yes, it's best to get you in a particular situation where you're optimized, but the world doesn't begin and end with you. World begins and ends with all of us, our connection and our place in the context of the collective. Now, you can bypass the individual and you'll have a separate set of considerations and problems if you just go into the collective and forget the individual and disparage the individual. And this happens in the spiritual world all the time. It's like it's all about the one, okay? And your personal traumas don't matter. That's self-indulgent to do trauma work, for example. And I've been pushing back on this for decades. My contention with Buddhism, for example, is that the lamas, sometimes the lamas just say, just do a couple mantras and say your prayers and your trauma will be over. They don't necessarily appreciate just how traumatized a lot of the Western or developed nations really are, how their attachments have been malformed, how they are dysregulated, how they have very deep, deep suspicion inside of them. They have very, very deep existential self-doubt and they have deep insecurities as a result of all the hereditary and transgenerational trauma that we are recipients of, and that somehow just sort of praying and dropping into oneness is going to be the ultimate medicine. So that's the problem on that side. What we need is something. See, it's always complicated. People don't like complexity. People don't like
Yeah.
to sit in that place of the tolerance of cognitive dissonances. How do we hold form with emptiness? How do we hold self with other? How do we hold, oneness with plurality? How do we hold these things? How do we hold the mountaintop view or vista with the marketplace and sex and sexuality? How do we do that? It's challenging. It requires conversations. It requires mistakes. It requires learning. It requires trial and error. It's not a quick thing. It's not an easy fix. And one of the things I learned about the Campbellian model is it's also a spiral. You never really arrive. You might have to
Right.
wherever you
Yeah.
arrive at some conclusion where you feel like, oh yeah, I'm starting to get this how to hold these two things. Well, something's going to come along to again, not to it will disrupt you, but not don't take it personally that it disrupts you. Take it from the Jungian perspective that it says there's even more growth for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I so appreciate I'm kind of hoping that Jung is because he has so much to help us, I think, and he's been sort of rejected by a lot of psychology, and I think that's a mistake, and that's part of I would suggest that's probably part of the paradigm, this the sickness of paradigm, because he is speaking about soul, he is speaking about necessary actions of going into the darkness, going into the unconscious, and being honest about that. So I was very happy. I'll be honest. When I got your book, and I started reading it, it was nothing that I thought it was going to be, because I did think that it was going to be mostly about Buddhism, and I think that was because of the image on the
Cover.
cover. But as I was reading, I'm like, "Wow, this is not what I was expecting," and that's a good thing.
That is a good
uh,
thing. Very good thing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah,
agree with you. I think Jung was ahead of his time, and I
yeah,
think Jung will see a resurgence. Is
yeah.
seeing a resurgence of interest, precisely because he was a psychonaut. He wasn't just a
Right,
psychologist. He's a psychonaut, and he was
right.
interested in the soul. He was a mystic. And
Yeah,
so I think, just to your point that you made earlier about everybody is hungry for the mystical experience, Jung wasn't satisfied with Freud's reductionism and the
yeah,
paradigm itself, and he paid the price. He was willing to pay the price, and his legacy, took a back seat. And that's why psychology, my discipline, where it is right now, it's situated mostly, all the funding and research goes to neuroscience, and
right.
and and so but it saying that what a human being is chemistry, and that you can treat ailments with pills, is it's only a matter of time before that breaks down.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
I've
think it
rejected
is.
that a
Yeah,
long time ago. I mean,
yeah,
my career, because I had co-merging influences from both sides at the very outset of my training. I had both one foot in Tibetan Buddhism and psychology, because I was the disciple of two pioneers that brought those traditions together for the first generation. So I'm like a second generation person who, at the outset of my training, had two disciplines that could contrast with each other and hopefully hold the promise of seeing the blind spot of each.
yeah,
I had that ability to see that, the reductionistic thing and this whole thing of cognitive psychology bleeding into cognitive neuroscience, bleeding into neuroscience. And now it has a glass ceiling, and it will only go so far. It will never fully address the deeper hunger or issue of the human psyche. And Jung knew this, and
yeah,
so in a way he will, just like the psychedelic renaissance, and just like shamanism is seeing a renaissance, as you expressed. I think Jung will see a renaissance too, because I think he's
yeah,
a very, very helpful bridge between the worlds of science and psychology and spirituality and esoteric phenomenon, including astrology, including hermeticism, including alchemy. These things that probably for a while were on the fringes and even disparaged are now coming to the fore. And
yeah,
there isn't as, I don't know of too many people. It's a small handful of people that really can create that bridge to hold those,
yeah.
that weave that holds those things together so beautifully.
Yeah, yeah. I hope that there's a Jungian Renaissance, and some of my, I've had several guests that kind of ground their work in Jung, so that's always been something that I've appreciated. So we were talking about the kind of this, and again, yeah, your book is not entirely on Buddhism, and as I said at the very beginning, you bring in so many different things. But I started this conversation with this medical model where we're looking at the symptoms, the diagnosis. What about our prognosis?
Yeah, I mean, from a Buddhist perspective, let me answer it this way.
Yeah,
Personally, due to my own limitations, I can very often drift into a pessimistic perspective. Okay. I'm just saying that personally. Depending on
mm,
the day, I can look at the world and I can say, we're totally screwed. We are totally screwed. We are so far behind the curve, and human beings really aren't willing to do the work.
mm,
I mean, we are basically on the Titanic, and I have a look at Western culture or developed nations and pseudo spirituality and self-aggrandizement, and people are playing with power tools like tantra and psychedelics, and I don't know if we have enough time for people to wake up, to really do the work and to take responsibility. When I say do the work, is like really take responsibility for the shadow, take responsibility for our own blindness, stop pointing fingers. Okay. I mean, I have so many criticisms, for example, of the people's movement. I For example, social justice, I feel, is just in the early days of a massive hypocrisy, because in the spirit of trying to bring the marginalized to the fore, they have reenacted the very trauma that they disparage, because they basically are responsible for cancel culture and bludgeoning people over the head and intimidation and silencing and basically coercing people to follow into some sort of woke dogmatism. And so there's just, even when it's well intended, we are misaligned.
Mm.
And so when I look at that stuff, like, I think, yeah, it comes from a really pure impulse, but look at how we're going about it.
Yeah.
The people that were on Instagram saying, look, I got vaxxed, and look, you need to wear a damn mask because you're not being humane. And they challenged everybody else. Put more dirt into the stream of division. They're just as bad as the other side that was saying, no, white this, and, like, kick everybody out of the country and build walls. you know, People that are so-called virtuous and beating their chest are using the very methods that only incite more division. And so on days like that, when I really see that, and I was a
Mm.
person in the middle of the pandemic that tried to keep communities from actually having, I tried to maintain the spirit of real diversity, not the woke versions of diversity. I'm talking diversity of viewpoint, where people from both sides of political orientations, from multi-religious points of view, could sit by each other and civilly disagree, but respectfully really hear that,
Mm.
for example, if you're pro-life or you're the other side, that actually, or you're pro-gun and against guns, that all these things that divide us, actually, you could very quite readily go deep into the compassion and see for a moment it from the other side of view. Gun control, for example, people that say you should take away guns are coming from a compassion point of view. They see that another school shooting is absolutely unacceptable. People that want to preserve the right for guns, if you look deeply and listen to their conversations, they want to preserve their sovereignty because they see that, for example, governments could really just turn on an about face and leave everybody at risk. And so, just if you just can get out of your own head and out of your own
Mm.
perspective and understand another human being, and I tried to do this during the pandemic. I tried to keep coherence between opposing views respectfully. I'm not asking anyone to adopt another point of view, but I'm asking people to really try to understand. And what I found, unfortunately, to my despair, really, is that the extreme voices were the ones that dominated.
Mm.
The extreme views from both sides of the equation were the ones with the loudest microphones and the club to beat everybody, to shame everybody into their perspective. It was like religious hegemony.
Mm.
It's like, my point is not to be right, my point is to dominate you.
Yeah.
And if you pull that out, where does that go? What's the logical conclusion of that kind of domination? Is it that the entire nation of the United States should all be left? Is it that the entire nation of the United States should all be right? I mean, far right. I mean, it's ridiculous that we can't just come to the middle ground and let the more moderate people have these conversations, express their will, but also have something underlying a healthy respect and a healthy sense of nationalism, a healthy sense of commonality. That's what's missing. And so on certain days, and so for my community, just like a lot of communities, I was trying to hold ground for multiplicity, and in a way, it didn't last. I couldn't
Mm.
last. The powers that be of division and divisiveness ended up usurping even that intention. And so there are days, this is a long-winded answer, but there are days where I feel, yes, I mean, I don't have the conviction that we have what it takes. We will inevitably destroy ourselves along a number of these poly crises. Now, when I get into that despairing position, I do thankfully have allies and peers and colleagues and mentors that remind me of what the Buddha's ultimate medicine is, which is emptiness. And emptiness is not empty. Empty doesn't mean nothing. Empty means always hopeful, always
Mm,
possible. In the vast horizon of possibilities, it always comes down to one thing. There is a vast vista of possibilities. Nothing is fated or destined or purely evil. It comes down to personal choices.
mm,
And and our nature is fundamentally good, is the message from Buddhism, as opposed to the co-opted message of the sinner from Christianity, which I don't actually believe probably was there from the mystical point of view. It was there from the religious authority point of view in order to control people. Is that we're not born in original sin. We're not born as fated to destroy ourselves. We're not born as innately and inherently and forever blind. We need to outsource we have to pardon ourselves and mea culpa ourselves and outsource our power to somebody who can actually like be a better mother or parent to our infantile, reckless infantile reactions. It's more like, no, we are fundamentally good. Our nature is fundamentally clear. If we can tap our nature, if we can find our nature, we will see things differently. And when we see things differently, the bodhisattva spirit that we talked about, this idea of being sensitive to others, caring of others, not passively caring and not weakly caring and not grandiosely caring and not codependently caring, but really caring, wise caring, knowing exactly what is needed of the moment, that we can turn things around. And there's, when I look at my teacher Geshe Tenzin Zopa, for example, who's in my estimation, after being around it for 20 years, very, very well realized, very well along the path. One telltale sign is that he sees the problems of the world, but his nervous system is always buoyant.
mm.
And the Dalai Lama is the same. The
Yeah.
Dalai Lama is someone who has experienced cultural genocide and displacement. He's not pretending. He's not silver lining. He's not, into the manifestation and into the optimization of your mind.
Right.
He's someone that sees the gross and grand scale of the displacement and murder and genocide of his people, and yet look, he's giggling and
Yeah.
engaging and smiling and buoyant and not troubled to the point where his nervous system is contracting into fight or flight or paralysis, but actually circling the world at 80 years old, having conversations with people and really trying to be the best and to embody the best message, which is,
Mm,
we can do this. You have it within you. It's not about religion. It's about compassion. It's not only about compassion, but it's about wise compassion. It's about returning to our natures. It's about staying in it. It's about having hope and sharing your hope. It's about sharing the best inside of you together. These kinds of messages show, demonstrate what's possible for all of us. And so I'm saying two things. I'm not always capable of it. I contract into despair, and I'm equally prone to my own shadow of wanting to be part of a divisive side that wins. But then I have these reminders of like, no, that's not where I want to put my energy.
yeah.
That's not effective use of energy. And there's very little time and there's very little energy to mess with and to play with and and so there's something inside of us that has a choice, is really both what I think Buddhism ultimately says, but also what I try to convey in the book.
Yeah.
And the choice is to go for humanity, go for the bigger picture, try to put your energy what bring us together, not necessarily what creates further division. So I
Yeah.
wasn't out there going pro pandemic and pro lockdown. I wasn't also out there going anti-vax. I wasn't getting involved in that. I have my own
Mm,
personal perspectives on it, but I didn't want to put any more energy in division.
yeah.
I also don't want to pretend that it's not there, that the Israeli-Palestine conflict is like an illusion. No, But is there a third way? Is there a middle way so that you're not pro-Palestinian or Hamas, terrorist organization, but you're also not like falling under the delusion that you can be a Jew and be outspoken about the hegemonic agenda of the Israeli government. It's not anti-Semitic.
Right.
And both of those true. Both of those are true at the same time. So what is the best way to deal with this issue is at the very least, on the first toe step forward, try to love everybody in their moments of despair and delusion. Like try to see the humanity first. And then people will come back at me and say, well, that's not going to help with the war. And I'm going to come back at them and say, what are you doing that's helping the war when you're out there
Mm.
protesting and saying, that Hamas is a good thing and that we should protect Hamas, or that we should protect all Israeli has the right to destroy an entire country in self-defense. I mean, don't be preposterous. Let's look at the imagery of an entire country leveled and tell me that that's justified in self-defense. So neither option, just like neither option between Biden and Trump are good candidates. Why don't we start by saying that?
Yeah.
And let's take it one step further. What Jung would say is that these are projections of the absolutely ill-resourced, idealized leaders that we have put out there in the world because of our own inability to conjure up a better option inside of us.
Mm.
This is what we get when we don't know how to find a middle way inside of us. We get
Yeah.
these two absolutely, one is catatonic and incapable, and the other one is narcissistic and absolutely hell-bent on his own agenda. These are not good options. Nobody should be celebrating. And then, but then, so what does that mean? Just sit home and smoke a cigar and watch more football? No, it means look inside yourself. We have a failure of imagination. We
Mm.
we are not looking for third options in the labyrinth of our own mind about what it means to be actually ethical and powerful. We don't have inside our mind a template for what it looks like to be both ethical and powerful. That's the message right now.
Mm.
That's what we're in search for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, there's a lot there, and I'm in agreement with pretty much everything you said. I think that we're missing a lot of nuance, and people don't. It's very difficult to have conversations, or I don't even want to say arguments with a lot of people because there's just no listening because they, it's this automatic. Well, no, that's not what I think, so therefore bad. And both sides are always repeating the same things, and I'm like, that's not thought, and that's kind of groupthink, and that doesn't get us anywhere. And what I always try to do, my point of view, with the politics is kind of the soapbox that I always get on is looking at, just kind of focusing on America. This is relevant, I think, everywhere. Is that the American system of government, as a republic, is supposed to be grounded in ideas of virtue, not virtue signaling, but actual virtue of being the best people that we can be, these positive character qualities to instill in ourselves and to practice on a regular basis. And that's also part of Buddhism. I mean, Buddhism teaches a lot of virtues, and compassion is a virtue. And I see not a lot of people kind of grasp, because I think that's the morality. And if you talk about, an ethic and power, that's what, it's been around for a long time. It's what the Greeks and the Romans, they all said, yes, we have to have virtue in terms of our government. And, George Washington was, chosen the first president because of his perceived virtues. And of course, he failed in many ways. But there was the virtue of not clinging to power and saying, nope, I did my terms and I'm done. Someone else can now take control. And we've very much lost that idea. That's my 2 cents for it.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement, and I
Yeah.
I think, part of what I wrote in the book is that the archetypes of the collective unconscious, the signs and symptoms, because now we're still in the framework of the problem, the symptoms, the diagnosis, the etiology. The prognosis is the
Yeah.
question that you asked me, and I gave you
Right.
an honest answer
Yeah.
depending on the day. But yes, the collective unconscious is revealing where we're lost, but in where we're lost, if we go on the adventure of where we got lost, we will also find solutions.
Yeah.
So you don't find solutions. What was that word that you used at the top, which I loved, about the home, being homesick where you're at home?
Oh, solastasia.
Okay, solastasia is a mind state in which solutions won't be found.
Hmm.
It's kind of a down state. It's a Debbie Downer state. Okay, it's the beginning of the journey. It's what hopefully will inspire urgency to move or to embark. But once you go on the journey and you start looking at these things, you start looking at the underlying causes, and you start meeting the mystical traditions, and the mystical traditions all agree that, of course, you're always pure potential, which means there's always hope. And actually, always hope is another way of saying there's always home. You just have to reacquaint yourself with it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you have to find it. You can't be told, like, no matter how many speakers you bring on this podcast who all say, home is within, or you have,
Yeah.
it's not something that can be communicated that way. It has to be lived and experienced, and it can be experienced through a deep meditation, and it can be experienced in a deep moment of nature, and it can be experienced during deep love with a child or with a partner, and it can be experienced in psychedelics, and all of these are ways in to remember the great revelation. But that's not enough. The revelation then has to move you even further. And part of what's happening in the collective unconscious, as far as I'm concerned, is that we have entered into a new epoch. And part of the Aquarian energy that's coming in is that we each, the ordinary ones, not the extraordinary ones, not the saints, not the politicians, not the religious leaders, the ordinary masses, it's now our burden to bear this conundrum between power and ethics. It's now each of one of us has to embrace that. We can't outsource it. Yeah, outsourcing it to Trump or Biden is not, to Netanyahu and whoever. It's not. We can't point fingers. That's why the pointing fingers isn't going to work. We have to look within. We have to find both our competency and our confidence, which will lead to authentic leadership. But we have to ground that in virtue, in our own sensibility of being able to work with our impulses and restrain our impulses and resensitize ourselves to the predicament of other people. And so both those things are needed in the world right now, but it can't be, you can't wait for, Obama to come back and do it. The idea in the book of the return of the king, which I talk about drawing on a number of cultural prophecies around the world, whether it be Mesoamerican or Indic or Tibetan or Indonesian or Egyptian, Hermetic. What they're saying about the period of time that we're in is that we are coming through the dark night into the new dawn of a new age. And the other thing they're saying is that this is a time of integration, that we have to reunite both sides of our hemispheres, the logical side with the intuitive side, the masculine with the feminine, the individual with the collective. And so it will take quite a tolerance of cognitive dissonance, a period of going one way and then the other, which we're seeing, but then coming back to the middle and drawing on the best of both and moving away from the extremes.
Hmm.
And one of these toggles will be about power and ethics. because what we see right now is the ethical people have no power and the powerful people have no ethics. And so how do you, and then
Right.
also each individual person has to work that out, because that's what's new about the incoming signature. It's no longer a pyramid scheme with a few powerful people on the top. Although in the beginning of the the Aquarian age, you see the pushback. So, for example, Musk, Bezos, all the people that stood proudly behind Trump during the inauguration, all the tech oligarchs, they all represent the pushback of the incoming age. It's like it could very well be a few people with all the power in the world who own the AI and can control the fate of the entire humanity. Or we can go deep in the shadow. We can go on a deep adventure. We can reclaim what it will take to come back bolder, stronger, confident, but also fiercely compassionate and ethical and sensitized to the plight of humanity. In other words, the things that we see out there that are lacking, we have to go on the adventure to find within, and to not shortchange ourselves. That if enough people, so this is what the Aquarian is about, is it's not a hero's adventure anymore of Jason and the Argonauts. It's not a solitary hero that returns in the Aquarian age. It's a collective. It's a group.
Mm.
It's more like Wizard of Oz. It's it's the sum total of the ordinary people who have come back transformed that will have the ability to actually push back on the oligarch,
Mm.
and not before. And see, right now it's too early, because what are the masses doing right now? They're divided.
Hmm.
And probably, if I'm going to say, if I'm going to be honest, strategically so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's interests that want to keep us that way, it would
Yeah,
seem.
and powerful technologies that can amplify that
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah. 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 Because we don't, again, we don't listen. And it's, I always think that we forget that this has been around, and maybe this is not quite right in terms of what we're talking about, but I always kind of point to Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, and he was kind of touring the new nation back in like 1810 or something. I think he published the book in 1820, and he was, fascinated by this new nation and talking to people. And one of the things that he wrote about over and over and over again is that the early Americans, they had this idea of self-interest, that self-interest is what that's the way to go. But they constantly said it was self-interest properly understood. And the self-interest that was properly understood was that, yes, I need to act out of my self-interest, but my self-interest is the best way for me to achieve my self-interest is if I recognize that my self-interest is connected with the self-interest of the community.
Yeah,
It's not just about the individual, but it's about the community as
that's right.
well.
The Dalai Lama has a phrase that he's coined for that. He calls it enlightened self-interest. He
Yeah.
said exactly the same thing. He's in complete agreement with that. If you're going to be self-interested, at least be enlightened self-interested, which is
Hmm.
to understand that fundamentally your interest, your best interest is is held within the embrace of what's in good for everybody else. You can't be a siloed tower, ivory tower,
Right.
especially now. So if you really want to be self-interested, be smart about it, which means be considerate that you're connected in an interdependent field with everybody else, and you can't escape. You can't, I'm here in Bali, which is supposed to be a paradise island. Yeah, but we're confronting rapid development and the deterioration of all the natural resources and widespread corruption and in the government and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't escape to Bali and have your rice field villa and pretend that you're going to be, have a good life separate from the world. No, there's no escape anymore.
Yeah.
Nowhere in the world. nowhere in the world can, even the rich guys can't, build a spaceship up in space. You can't go to New Zealand and build a fortress there with a bunker filled with food. It's not going to work. I mean, because we are radically interdependent. And so, yeah, I mean, that is very close to the heart of the Buddha's great realization about the non-dual union of compassion and ultimate wisdom.
Right. Yeah. And that's what we need, compassion and wisdom. And I would suggest also something that would help with a lot of this, especially with the polarization and especially political polarization, is for people to recognize that you don't know everything. It goes back to Socrates, the only thing I know is that I do not know. And I always like Thoreau, his version is we should remember well our ignorance. Because if you
That's a
approach
very
it,
high bar right now.
well, but
Oh.
still, I mean, it's like if you can adopt that and say, okay, well, maybe I don't know everything. And that allows you to kind of listen to others and hear, and you can start maybe identifying that there's common cause on a lot of these things. But we don't see that common cause because everyone's just screaming at each other.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to be right, trying
Yeah,
to control the territory, to win the
yeah,
to win the race. It's more about
yeah,
winning
yeah,
than understanding.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I agree with that. So the treatment is the elixir.
The elixir falls into the third noble truth, the Buddha's noble truth
Okay.
of nirvana is the
Mm,
elixir, the amrita,
okay.
and so what we're saying is the view of oneness, what by the mystical experience is in terms of our conversation, what we were talking about, whether by way of shamanism, by way of psychedelics, by way of authentic spiritual traditions, by way of nature, by way of examination. I mean,
Mm,
surely you can get there through Philos, but ultimately you have to bypass the conceptual and get into the heart. That's
yeah.
important. You have to have an embodied experience. And, so what they all share in common is this deep awakening to the interconnected field. And that's where you get resensitized. That's where the compassion comes from. So the view and the compassion come together in the embodiment. That's the nectar. The nectar
Okay.
shows you you are immortal. The nectar shows you you are forever. The you are not just this one life. You are not just this body. You are not just a set of values. You're not just your gender. You're not just your identity. You are not your political, orientation. You are forever.
Mm,
And in your foreverness, you two things. You are also foreverly interdependent and interconnected in a vast field with everybody else. So there is no real just nodal you. There's more we. And then not only that, but the vibration, the consequence of our actions ripples forth and not only impacts others, but comes back to us. So you have emptiness, you have vastness, you have interconnectivity, you have the vast consequentiality, and you have the deep soul, which is this transgenerational, transmigrational, vibrant, vitalizing force. That's who you really are. And you're here to wake up. And once you wake up, then you also here to reclaim a purpose, to find some avenue in your avatar, your personal, to come back to the personal. So it's not just about staying and remaining in the oneness, but we have to make the return journey. Okay, and the return journey means come back into your identity, but make it more flexible identity. Come back into your identity, but make it a more purpose-driven identity. Come back into your work life, come back into your family, come back into your community, and through wise leadership and altruism and the sense of the vision of the mountaintop oneness, come back into finding a way, not by browbeating and cajoling people. You want to invite them into a spirit of inquiry by being a healthy, clear mirror for them, not a proselytizing, Bible beating, door to dooring car salesman or worse. That's not how you do it. And see, the problem is that people, if only predominated by the one life perspective, have an egregious or wrong sense of urgency. And so they have to dominate people now. The reason my teacher and the Dalai Lama remain buoyant is they have the long view. And then people go, we don't have enough time. And then they come back and say, no, we have infinite time. And your urgency is creating more fire. So don't tell us that, that's the better way. Your urgency of beating people into submission isn't getting you any closer. And so this is what they've learned, the mystics have learned, is like your art, it's called upaya in
Mm.
Sanskrit. It is your art form of helping another being wake up. As a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, as a podcaster, as a mother, father, as a member of your community, at the coffee shop with the barista, small little interactions, your art, how you play a role in your purpose-driven mission to remind beings of the mountaintop vista view of interconnectivity and compassion is really important. What you do on your show and what I do in my office or what I do on pilgrimage is both unique and different, but could come from the same bodhisattva spirit.
Mm.
And that would be enough to unite us, but then also preserve our distinction and our unique predisposition in this life. We don't all have to be a podcast, spiritual show, radio show
Right.
host, or a professor or a therapist. You just come back and try to be more a better version of you, and you stop trying to corral people or coerce people. You just try to help put up reminders, and if they don't take it, they're not there or they're not ready. And
Yeah.
what can we do? And then just keep coming back to you. How well in alignment are you living today? Not only about you, you try your best in the spirit of reflection to help people, help mirror the best inside of them, the most open-minded, the most optimistic, and the most sensitized inside of them. But you don't get ensnared. I mean, the analogy I like to use is when we were trained in lifeguarding or life saving. Somebody's drowning in the water. When you approach them, you don't try to grab them because they'll bring you under. Their
Mm.
vibration of survival is very powerful and can kill you too. So you actually approach them and you try to calm them down. You say you're not going to drown right here, but you keep a safe distance. And if they try to swing for you, you actually back away from them.
Mm.
Or you pull a real martial art maneuver where you get underneath them and you
Mm.
grab them and you pull them to shore, and then you have a serious conversation with them. But the idea is in the spirit. You're not trying to overpower anybody. You're just there to reflect and to remind in very subtle and creative ways, and keep your own. See, that's why I said I disclosed to you that it's really important that I remain honest in conversations like these. I too can get hijacked by my own nervous system, and when that happens, I need somebody else to be my reminder, somebody who's in a good state of mind that sees the possibility of human beings, that can remind me that being disgruntled and angry and afraid and divided isn't the right energy. We're getting no closer to the solution with that energy and that vibration. And actually, that's one of the things that I wrote in the tail end of Elixir. One of my revelations was at a mountaintop temple in Bali called Panchapunulisan, where I was working with, you could say, a priestess or a shaman. And one of the revelations that came out of our work at that mountain temple was that the future of sustainability and transformation of the new civilization that's in our hands as a potential to co-create must come from a different vibration.
Mm.
And it was very, very important that energy, our frequency, our vibration, is the single most important active ingredient in the construction of a better world. That it's actually not a physical demanding or an imputation from above or a control mechanism. And this is why I push back on some of the woke ideology and also the woke tactics, is that the vibration is still hostility.
Mm.
It's still division. It's still division. It's us, we're right, and send to the gallows all the other people that don't agree with us. And so social activists who are doing noble intended work still need to do their own shadow work They need to go into and work out the kinks of their own trauma. And they need to find that vibration of love. And then they can go and do activism. Then they can be very powerful proponents of unifying people rather than creating more division.
Yeah.
And so energy is really, really key. The Aquarian age is all about energy, not just about external energy and renewables, for example. We will find incredible new life extending medicines in the Aquarian age. We will find incredible new green, sustainable, renewable energy resources. But the most important one is finding very powerful internal energies inside of us that can create more coherence rather than division, that we're that powerful
Yeah.
amongst not just human beings, but with the planet and with the animal kingdom, and also remembering our place within the non-seen and unseen domain of living beings, that there are also extraterrestrials and there are also other dimensional beings that we have to be in coherence with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the connection, the interconnectedness with all things, and the other way you end the book is, it's the time for love and liberation.
Mm, indeed. It's
Yeah.
love and liberation. What I meant by that is again, it was the union of opposites. Okay. So
Yeah.
it came out of the archetype that emerged in another revelation across my 5-year pilgrimage called the Shiva Buddha archetype, where
Hmm.
instead of there being division between Shaivism and Buddhism, what I discovered was 500 years ago, Shaiva and Buddhism were once practiced in Indonesia as a syncretic form of common union, a union. In other words, they split and division between them was created. And Buddhism in Indonesia became extinct, and Hinduism or Shaivism only grew in Bali. Meanwhile, the entire Indonesian archipelago was taken over by Islam. And there is a prophecy in there called the Satapalan prophecy, which is, I won't go into it, but I'll leave it as a prompt for people who are curious to investigate further. The Satapalan prophecy is about the time we're living in right now, where some 500 years earlier, a sacred priest envisioned that we would enter into a period of darkness and separation. And he knew that Shiva and Buddha as archetypes would be divided. But he predicted that in 500 years, which is the time we're living in right now, there would be a period of reintegration. And so if you just look at it archetypally, Shiva is about destruction and Buddha is about awakening. And so we are now living in a period of destruction and awakening. And another way that they can be understood is that Shiva is about liberation, transcendence, but Buddha is about coming back into the world with compassion. And so you need both movements. It's the outbound and the inbound journey. It's the one of transcendence, but it's also the return. It's the one of the masculine assertiveness, but also the feminine receptivity. It's the right brain of reason and the left brain of intuition. We've been talking about it in different
Mm.
ways across the entire conversation, but this is the
Right.
period of integration. And I end the book with that idea of love and liberation, of being free, but also not in exclusion of our completely inclusive. And I don't like how woke has taken all these terms and rebranded them. When they say diversity, equity, and inclusion, they don't actually they're not actually inclusive of everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not inclusive of people with different points of view.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, from a philosophical perspective, I think that I'm always deeply concerned with the issues of social justice, but I also see, like you've been pointing out that you write in the book, that there is this hypocrisy often with those who identify with wokeness, and it doesn't help anything, and it doesn't help their cause at all. And I also often find them very unforgiving, and that we're losing so much.
The noble cause. That's the thing. It's
Yeah,
got a beautiful spirit. I mean, I
yeah,
don't ever want people to lose sight of that. Like I
right,
think, yeah, people who want to channel energy into making sure that everybody's needs matter
yeah,
and that there is justice and that there isn't tyranny. That's beautiful. But it goes back to my point. the energy by which, like, the means don't justify the ends. You have to have the right energy to really be a noble activist.
Yeah.
And if it means that you can't dominate the conversation or the situation or change it immediately, you have to find, you have to look at those people like the Dalai Lama, not me, because I can't sustain that kind of energy. But the people that can sustain that energy, you have to really see that they want the same thing. They do want justice, and they do want, equity, and they do want real diversity. And look at how they're conducting themselves
Yeah.
with integrity. Their words and their actions are aligned, and mostly because they're coming out of a pure energy, better energy.
Yeah. 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 Well, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. There is we're on the journey, I think, and we're seems like we're in the kind of in the belly of the well a little bit, which is,
For sure.
symbolic of
For
the
sure.
unconscious. And, we need to look at that. We need to look at what is driving us. And it's hard work.
Yeah.
It's really hard work to do. And I don't know how many people are actually capable. And I always try to just be humble and, like, I'm imperfect, and I try to catch my own shadow stuff and just try to be the best that I can be, and think about being kind to people and develop that compassion and just work on that. And that, I hope, helps make the world a better place. And maybe, if nothing else, I can be a role model to some people, where it's like, you don't have to be angry. You don't, because there's always something behind the anger.
Yeah.
There's always something else that's driving it. And so, well, we've been talking for a while now. It's early where you are, but it's getting late where I am, and dinner's calling. So let me ask you the final two questions that I always ask. One is, what are you working on next? Do you have anything coming up?
Yeah, I mean, working on next is not so much a product or
Okay.
something like that. It's more what I've been working on in the 5 years that I was writing Elixir was changing the modality with which I work. So
Mm.
at the beginning of the book 5 years ago, I was I was classically trained psychotherapist in a concrete cinder block office in a big building in Manhattan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had built my way up to established enough of a reputation where I had a good niche and
Mm.
a good life. I mean, it was a good life. And then, I had my own symptoms. I started having panic attacks, and I eventually, started looking at those symptoms as a call to adventure, that the walls of my office were constricting me and confining me. And also my discipline was confining me. The institution of psychotherapy was confining me. I wasn't finding the kinds of answers that I think the world that is incoming needed. So my journey to Bali and letting go of that whole life and my income and who I was and all the way down to my identity was a rebranding, was a transformation, was a transformational journey. And so Return with the Elixir is in part is a document that chronicles my personal hero's adventure, but then it also situates it in the great classic disciplines, Jung and Campbell and Tantra and cosmology, so that people have roadmaps for their own journey. But to answer your question, so what do I do now? I mean, I'm repurposing my psychotherapy and Buddhist training as a pilgrimage guide, because I believe that so much healing can happen and transformation can happen in a 2 week journey to
Mm.
sacred sites, and particularly sites that need revival themselves. So ancient Greece and Turkey are now on the agendas, where at one time I was only taking people to Buddhist sites.
Mm.
Part of what I learned in Return with the Elixir, and that we discussed, you and I, Nick, on the show, was that the convergence of all these places is in the mystical experience. And so it's not about Buddhism anymore for
Yeah.
me. It's about the gnosis, the direct experience. And that has opened my world up, because I was a classically trained teacher of Tibetan Buddhism. My last book, Gradual Awakening, was all about the steps of the path from the Buddhist perspective. And I used to just do tours to Buddhist places, and I will continue to do them, and I will continue to teach them. But another part of me feels enriched and enlivened by the prospect of also doing journeys to other sacred lands where there are powerful portals of spirituality that have been around for thousands of years, if not more. In one case, in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, for example, is a place that's 7 or 8 or even 9,000 years old. Gedung Padang here in Indonesia is 20,000 years old. And when you bring people to these places, and just like in psychedelics, they have the right mindset, preparation, intention, and the right careful, considered post pilgrimage integration, these are very powerful catalysts for transformation. There's something very, very powerful in the psyche about what we used to do in very ancient times in antiquity, moving towards a sacred space. But then in the process of moving towards a sacred space, also remembering that we have natural capacities for healing within us. And the journey helps bring these out. And so my maps and models from terms of Elixir, Campbell, Jung, Tantra, I now teach them not in didactics and lecture halls. I teach them spontaneously on the road as you walk. For example, in 2 weeks, I'll be in Spain on the Camino de Santiago. Next year, we go to the Kumano, which is a sacred trail in Japan. I have a trip up to the Sum Valley in the Himalayas in Nepal on the border with Tibet. I'll have a trip to Turkey, which goes to Göbekli Tepe by way of Anatolia. And what we're trying to do is set up an experience where intention, internal works, arts, mystical experiences, practices, contemplations, group work can happen on the road in motion. And I found those to be really, really directly relevant to the needs of people in this time that we're living in right now.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds exciting. And I've had a couple of guests on who've done something similar. I had some Ed Tick who takes people to Greece to the ancient sites of Asclepius. And your book
Yeah,
starts by talking about
that's right.
Asclepius.
And
Yeah.
you've had Sarah Janes on your show too, right?
Sarah James? No, I don't think so.
Sarah Jane, so she's a wonderful. She also wrote published with Intertradition. She also is reviving the Asclepion and taking people on
Okay.
pilgrimage to Greece. Amazing, amazing. That I
Yeah.
mean, I say I don't think that these are. I think this is when I see other people shifting their lives to do something else. I'm reminded about Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. That there's something in us, and then those of us that are responding to it are coming up with solutions, novel solutions compared to prior parts of our career, because we're responding to something that reflects the needs of the civilization right now that's incoming.
Yeah. 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 No, I appreciate it. And I think that there's other ways that it's manifesting, perhaps. Some of my background's also in philosophy, and there's always been, well, not always, for about 400 years now, there's been this very clear distinction between philosophy and religion. And if you go back to some like the pre Socratic philosophers, they were having mystical experiences. There wasn't this, division. And one of my dreams is to bring that back to philosophy because I think it
It's the
needs it.
same with
Yeah.
science.
Yeah.
The Indic sages were scientists and psychonauts at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. 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 Newton was an alchemist, and yeah, we forget a lot of these things. So, where can people go to find out more about you and the pilgrimages that you're leading?
They can visit the gradualpath.com.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I
Okay.
have my 4 pillars. So I do coaching or therapy,
Okay.
individual work, pilgrimages, courses, and service. I think all 4 of those cover different bases or needs of the human being. So gradualpath.com. Thank you so much for that invitation and for speaking
Sure.
with me today. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed the book. And I know that there are some things that have been said and some things in the book that will rub people, some people the wrong way, but that's okay. I think it's
That's
important.
okay. It really
Yeah.
is okay. Yeah.
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 I think
That's
it's important
sometimes the
that,
sparks.
yeah. Well, I think it's important that things are said and recognize that not everything is perfect. And, maybe our points of view need to be examined a little bit. So I appreciate that. So, but I did, and I did love the book. I think it's a great book, and it was an interesting read. And I hope that we gave people a taste of what they can find in it. And I do like the personal aspect that you brought in too. You know, you're describing your own personal journey. So it was a really good book, and it was also one that I said, you know, that it prompted. It was like poking my spirit, but it was also one
Yeah.
that when I was finished, I was like, I wish I could read this a second time before speaking with him. But I think we did fine. So, Miles, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time and the conversation.
Yeah, Nick, thanks for what you do. Thanks for all you offer to create a space for dialogue. I found you to be really open-minded and really receptive, and I found a lot of really, you know, great energy between us. So I want to say thank you for that. And also in your personal journey, what happens for you next, you know, whatever the next stage or phase in your life brings, you know, I want to wish you all the best on your own heroic endeavors. So yeah, I hope that you
Thank you.
really, you know, go through your metamorphosis with all
Yeah.
the wisdom and all the
Yeah.
guides and sages.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. And that's a wrap on episode 204 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are a part of my YouTube audience. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. You can also follow Rebel Spirit Radio on whatever audio platform you use for listening to podcasts. Right now, I have over 20,000 downloads on the audio platforms, yet I only have 13 followers, and one of those is me. It only takes a second to like, follow, or subscribe. It is totally free, and it really does help. Putting together this podcast is a labor of love. I do love it, but it is a lot of labor. So if you find value in the conversations I provide here, I hope you can find it in your heart to send a little of my way. With more subscriptions and followers, I could possibly get sponsorship, and honestly, having some funds come my way to help with equipment, hosting, and other necessary subscriptions would be really helpful. You can also help by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/rebelspirit. The link is also in the episode description. You can also purchase a super thanks on YouTube to help support my work. As I always like to say, I'm here in the Front Range now doing missionary work in regards to religion, spirituality, ecology, consciousness, the esoteric, and how all of this can help us heal humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. So if you feel moved by the rebel spirit, and you know I sure hope that you do, then please, by all means, help me in my efforts to share the good news. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to or watching Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.